Joining me tonight, as he so often does, is the one, the only, the exceptional Sir Richard Lewis. Richard, how are you?
Yeah, good, good. Busy day. I know you've been feeling it too. In the blazing Texan heat.
Yes,
Same here.
yes,
In the blazing Birmingham heat.
I'm sure.
It's been a brutally long day. Lots of news breaking. So I'll try and muster the requisite amount of energy to plow through.
Whatever your energy is, Richard, that's the perfect amount for us. We
Excellent.
accept you for who you are, and that's why we are who we are here at the Loadout, because we accept you. And if we accept Richard Lewis, that says a lot about us, I think. It does.
It definitely does. Yeah.
But let's not delay. I demand a lack of delays, including my own.
Okay.
So jumping into things, because we do have
Expedience.
yes, expedience, and no more rambling. We do have a busy slate to work our way through today. We'll start with this. Valve have made the decision to reiterate to ESL and, by extension, players' organizations that the players who are banned from match fixing are very much banned for match fixing. They're not soft banned. They're not banned from playing. They are banned from Valve events. They can't show up and
Yes.
coach. They can't be in any official role. They can't do anything of any sort associated with Counter-Strike Global Offensive at a Valve event. And now that Valve has got their fingers, if you will, in many events, or perhaps a growing number of them, as they have in Dota, getting more involved in esports overall, that would seem to be a pretty wide-ranging and wide-reaching announcement of theirs. So
Yeah.
the timing here is no coincidence. We have Swag becoming an official analyst for Cloud9. We had Steel perhaps becoming a CLG coach, moving into a team house with the team. Now he's just a streamer. So you know, guys, just a streamer. He's just streaming. No coaching, no analyzing going on there. Just streaming. It's all good. I think the names, the titles here are going to change. Perhaps the roles won't change that much as we move forward. But let's talk first about Valve's position here. What caused Valve, do you think, to kind of saunter in, like to the saloon, if you will, Western style, and brandish their pistols and say, hey, by the way, we're still the sheriff in town. Don't fuck with us. Don't try to get around our rulings. What caused this to come about?
Well, I think, look, it's got to be said, I don't necessarily blame Valve for arriving at this conclusion. It's quite a sensible and consistent application of the rules. For example, in regular sports, when people are caught for match fixing, they aren't then just allowed to transition into another role within the industry. They are prevented from any job that has the potential to influence the industry in which they work. And that makes sense because match fixing isn't just something you can do conveniently while you're on the server. Yes, it might be easier for players to facilitate, but as we've seen, for example, with the Promise situation out in Korea, which I'm told we'll be getting some updates about soon, the manager there bullied the team into throwing matches. The players actually didn't really want to do it, but felt under tremendous pressure in an environment where the manager controlled everything to do it. So then you go, okay, well, I guess managers can influence the outcome of games, but can coaches? Well, yeah, obviously they can. It wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility even for a coach to sort of say, look, the weak, to another team, that we've got a player who's particularly weak. They're playing this setup on this site, on this map. That's going to be our strat. That's going to be our tactic. If you exploit that, you'll probably win the game and sort of act like a double agent. Now, I don't think Steel or Swag or any of these guys are like that. I think they made a very uncharacteristic judgment of error at a time when there were no clear rules or definitions about how to behave surrounding these things. Obviously, from an ethical standpoint, we all know it was wrong. And they knew it was wrong when they were doing it. But equally, they couldn't have foreseen such drastic consequences as effectively being out of every big team in any capacity for the rest of their playing careers. Which brings me to a secondary point, and one that I've been wanting to say for a long time. I haven't been able to communicate with Valve directly. Now, this will probably surprise a lot of people because I spent 6 months chasing these guys. They lied openly in public about the story, about me. They still continue to kind of, some of them, some of the ones that were caught still continue to smear me and say derogatory things about me. And they characterized me as a liar, and they leveraged relationships with top streamers like Summit1G to have a platform I didn't, to call me a liar. And it's no secret Steele was a personal friend. I did feel a little bit betrayed that he didn't come clean, despite me giving him numerous attempts to do so. But all of that said, this indefinite ban is bullshit. It's simple as that. It's grade A bullshit. The Valve that I know are clear, decisive, and effective, and fair. That's how they are. They understand. They may not be the most vocal when it comes to communication. They may not be the most positive when it comes to communication with the community, but they are fair. They've always been fair. For example, when they introduced dynamic weapon pricing, which they put a lot of effort into developing in Counter-Strike Source, which was basically the weapons market in-game fluctuated like the stock market. The more a weapon was bought, the higher its value. The less a weapon was bought, the lower its value. It was a sort of way to stimulate the game, and they used different guns to reinvigorate gameplay. And the community said, this is absolute nonsense. You can't foist this upon us. We do not agree to these changes. We want CVARs put in so we can remove this. And the top teams were saying we'll pull out of every league. Within about 2-3 days, Valve had corrected it. They didn't just force their ideas on the community. And like I said, Valve have always been fair. Now, it's not fair to say to a player, your ban is indefinite. This is the kind of thing that Riot does. It keeps you dangling. All of these players need to know whether they've got a future in Counter-Strike. They all want a future in Counter-Strike, especially as it's got bigger and bigger and bigger. And we see this in League of Legends, where it's like Riot issue a 6-month ban, and then they say to the player, but we're reviewing it at the end of the 6 months, and they can be kept, strung along indefinitely, turn down real-life opportunities, studies, travel, jobs in the meantime, because they're desperately holding on to their dream. Valve shouldn't be perpetuating this. This isn't fair. This isn't right. This isn't what any player, no matter what they've done, deserves. So what Valve should be doing at this juncture is they've made it clear that they can't be coaches. They made it clear they can't be analysts. They made it clear that they will not be allowed to attend Valve events in any capacity. That's fine. Now they need to say for how long. They need to give a definite date.
Right. Do you think, Richard, because I think with Riot, it seems often that they want people to be left hanging, and they want them to have that feeling
Yes.
of we are at your mercy, basically. Do you think with Valve it's more a case of this is the first time they've had to step in and do this, and they don't really know what their own game plan is? They're not really sure when they first made the decision, like how long the ban was going to be?
I don't think it's like that. I simply feel that this is completely unknown territory for Valve. Valve are far from a malicious company. I remember one of my sort of proudest moments in my writing career was at a DreamHack many years ago. And it was, I think, just before CSGO. I think it was when CSGO was in beta, actually. And the Valve staff came along, including the legendary Ido. And they came up to me and they were like, "Oh, it's great to meet you. We all read your stuff. We think your column's great." And they just took the time to say that to me. Now, keep in mind, I've written some things that are critical about Valve in the past. Not always. I think Valve, in pound for pound, are one of the best games developers out there. I think they make successful games. They don't always, as I said, do what the community wants. But I think at this juncture, given the amount of award-winning games they made, maybe Valve know a thing or two that the community doesn't. I even said that CSGO, we might have to accept, I think the line I used was, we might have to accept CSGO will never be the game we want it to be. And yet here we are. Counter-Strike's never been this big, not even in the 1.6 heyday. So they clearly do know what they're doing. I've got a lot of respect for them. So I don't think they're malicious. I don't think they're vindictive. I think they've simply entered uncharted territory. Valve have never issued rulings like this. And let's be clear, after I put 6 months of my life into trying to get the truth out there, Valve could have still scuppered me at the last hurdle. They could have turned around and said, when I presented them with the evidence, which I emailed to about 5 or 6 employees, they could have turned around and just ignored it or said, we're not interested, or we don't get involved in things like this. And they didn't. They did the right thing. If they hadn't, I still look like an idiot. So I'm eternally grateful to Valve for what they've done. But This is unknown territory for them. They don't have a league commissioner. They've never got involved in disciplinary stuff before in the esports scene. And I just feel they haven't really thought it through. And ultimately, here's the thing. No matter what you think about what the guys in iBuyPower did, and I've got more reason to dislike them and to be upset with them than anybody in the community.
Unless perhaps you lost thousands of dollars on them. I guess that's one qualifier.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
But I mean, equally, I stood to lose my reputation.
That's true, yeah.
Which is worth more than, you know, a fucking Orb Asimov or whatever, right?
Or a dragon.
Or at least I like to think so.
Yes.
So
I believe it is, Richard.
So they need to be really clear. Is it a life ban? If it's life, say life, and let these guys go and get on with their real lives. If it's a year, say it's a year. If it's 5 years, say 5 years. But you've got to let these guys know. And for what it's worth, you know, they cheated. What we know is they cheated in one game. They threw one game, 4 skins in a tiny piss pot league, and maybe that doesn't make any difference. They did it at a time when there were no rules about it. We know that multiple European teams have got away with doing the same thing. There'll have been so much match fixing that remains undiscovered. And Valve made an example of these guys, and that's fine. But I think even a year ban is more than enough. I think their reputation, that's going to follow them for the rest of their lives. I think these are all punishments enough. And what I'd like to see is maybe the end of this year, first quarter of next year, something like that. I'd like to see the bans lifted, but more importantly, whatever Valve decide to do, and I understand why they're taking it seriously. No one takes it more seriously than me, which is why I spent all this time trying to expose it. But Valve need to be clear about the length of time. That's just the only fair thing here.
Yeah, it seems that way. I guess one question I have with this whole situation is I don't see how they could stop Steel, for example, having an analyst or a coaching role with CLG. He doesn't have to be called a coach. You can just have him there living in the team house as a streamer, as he says he is. I'm just a streamer, guys. And he can casually discuss Counter-Strike with the CLG players over the course of lunch.
I'm sure he will. I'm sure he absolutely will be doing that. And I'm sure, you know, he dare I say it, he'll review demos and give advice. Now, again, let's be clear about what Valve is saying here. What Valve aren't saying is, you know, that you could. They're not saying you can't work with these individuals. Sure. I'm sure they'd prefer it, but they're not saying that. They're not doing that classic overreach like we've seen from other games developers.
For example, Riot.
That we know, that we know and love. Yeah, basically only Riot.
I'll throw it out there. I'll do it for you. Yeah.
You know, they're not saying that. They're not trying to interfere with what an organization does. The reason that they've had their contracts downgraded and changed is pretty much a mark of respect from the organizations. It's pretty much to ensure there can be no accusations of anything like that. Those players won't be in attendance at the events. I'm pretty sure about that. I'm pretty sure that's going to be a stipulation, a rule. They can't be there. They can't even hand them bottles of water. It's just not going to be allowed. And that's fine. Again, people seem to forget that in real sports, when you have a match-fixing ban, you can't even enter a football ground or a cricket ground or whatever it is. You are banned. I mean, you are out of the sport. You are an outcast, and rightly so, because you've basically undermined the competitive integrity of a sport that everyone else is propping up for personal gain. Which is, again, like I say, it's a disgraceful thing to do, especially when you consider the people that got ripped off in all of this were, honest fans, honest gamblers. So that's really upsetting and really unfair.
Yeah, I do hope personally that the players do eventually get unbanned. Perhaps a year is appropriate, if only because they committed the same crime, if you will, want to call it a crime, the same act that many others did in other parts of the world and in North America as well, but didn't get caught doing it. You know, the part of their punishment is basically being made an example of. That's part of what they did. The transgression is that they are the example. I don't think they should receive more punishment than what others are because they are the example.
I agree. I think when you want to make an example of someone, you're setting a really dangerous precedent, because what do you do about people who come afterwards? What do you do about people who did it before them, but it gets discovered after? What do we do with retro? This whole idea of setting an example is just, it's nice in theory. It just doesn't work in practicality. So I think, let's also just to bring up this point. Let's also be clear as well that these guys, I think they really went through quite a lot. I mean, this is unprecedented in terms of how it's impacted on their careers, right? This is nothing like this has ever happened in Counter-Strike. It's a watershed moment for the sport, and that's why it attracted so much interest from the mainstream media. Even Vice, wrote about this. Now, the thing for me here is in real sports, and I've looked it up. We've seen people that have been given life bans. Like, okay, so serial match fixers in cricket, for example, the members of the Pakistan squad, they were given life bans, and one of them even went to jail for serially match fixing games over a prolonged period of time. That ban got lifted after 8 years, after it was, a life ban. Another one 6 years after it was a life ban. It got overturned on appeal. And my point is, with cricket, if you think about the lifespan of an average cricketer's career, there's still arguably an opportunity for them to come back even after something extreme like 6 or 8 years. Counter-Strike's a little bit different. 1 year is a ridiculously long time. I've always said it all my life that 3 months is the esports year. Everything will change in 3 months.
Right.
Lineups, sponsors, events, money, stature, viewer numbers. It changes so fast. So to ban somebody for, I don't know, 2 years, for example, which I'm sure they'd still probably be happy with because at least they know. But to ban somebody for even a period of like a year is unreal. What it does in terms of somebody's career and somebody's opportunities and how the scene changed, how the games change and everything.
Right. Well, 2 years is often a successful career right there. 2 full years.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you think about it in League of Legends terms. If you were to ban somebody for 2 years, I mean, there's really successful pros that have gone from amazing rookie to commentator in 2 years.
Yeah. 4 splits is 2 years. That's before. That's to give some idea of the time. That's like pre-Cloud9.
Yeah.
That's how long 4 splits is, So, yeah, it's a long time. We'll see what they do. I do hope they provide some clarity. The players certainly deserve to be in the position they're in, but they also deserve some clarity in that position.
I just think, I know Valve must know. Like, one of the things Valve don't like is when public figures sort of come out and challenge them, because they're like, you could just tell us, you could just tell us and we'll look into it. But with this, they must know by now that what they're doing isn't fair. And if the word indefinite is not acceptable in any sporting ruling for my money. If it's life, say life. If there's an opportunity for it to end, you need to say when it's going to end.
In a career ruling, really, not just a sporting ruling, but a career.
Exactly.
It's indefinite.
Imagine. I mean, actually, it'd be great. I was going to say, imagine if you were told you are indefinitely suspended from work. That'd be pretty sweet. But the
depending
point
on the
is,
circumstances, perhaps it would be.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, indefinite is just so vague. It's not acceptable. Like I say, no matter what these people have done, they have a right to know when their sentence comes to an end.
Surely, and hopefully they will. Hopefully, we will know sometime in the near future. Let's very briefly hit this next subject. Freakazoid had a little YouTube moment. Let's call it, after he went off on some people who bet skins on Cloud9 in the final against Fnatic and then lost those skins because Cloud9 choked away a couple maps, you might say, especially Dust 2. I think his position, it's not only a discussion point, his going off on his stream, but what he brings in terms of the potential for betting and the skins to actually impact the players and the teams, to add pressure onto them. Is this a real thing you're feeling and discussing this with players, that like the betting environment and the money that's on the line, does that affect them in the way they prepare for games? Do they think about it in the moment?
I don't think anyone does, really. I can't believe that. I mean, I saw the video and I thought, like, it does. Every pro player that I've talked about behind the scenes, they all have pretty much the same feeling about gambling and skins and what it's done for the game, and that is that they're really grateful it's boosted the numbers,
right?
Obviously, and they're really grateful that it's given them opportunities to monetize their products and the brand awareness, and fund all of the tournaments that they then go on to place in and earn money from. They're super grateful about it because obviously the two are effectively linked. It's not just. It's got to be said. It's not just the fact that the skins exist with and of themselves. You take away the gambling, and skins themselves are inherently less valuable, if you know what I mean. Because there's no. You would need to sell them through PayPal, and no. There's no instant sort of gratification model based around them where you can effectively use their presumed value to increase the overall value of your collection.
Right.
So, and we all know for a fact as well that even though I think this is changing and it's going the other way, in early CS:GO, when you had sort of the first gambling sites come out and CS:GO Lounge first started taking off, the difference between a game that was being streamed without being on CS:GO Lounge and games that were being streamed with CS:GO Lounge were ridiculous. It would almost triple the numbers. So we know for a fact that actually the growth of the game does owe a certain amount of thanks to gambling, and the players know it too.
Right.
But you know what? They also know that all of the DDoSing, all of the hate, all of the negativity they get when they lose, that pretty much stems from gambling as well.
Yeah.
And for them, it's very much a double-edged sword. So I think what Freakazoid said is pretty much, it echoes the sentiments of every pro player I've ever sat down and had a talk with. And indeed, to link it to what we were talking about earlier with the match fixing thing, one of the reasons why I think some players probably don't think too much about, some players took some skins off these people, is because they find it very hard to differentiate between those people getting scammed and them being innocent, and those being actually, the same people that abuse them every time they lose a game because they try to play the percentages.
Right.
I think most pro players have next to zero respect for gamblers because we're dealing with a very young player base, very immature player base, and they don't gamble like adults.
They don't do many things like adults, actually.
Well, yeah, they don't do many things like adults, but I mean that doesn't apply to everybody. But the reality is, look, I've made this joke before. Like, people say, "Oh, you shouldn't be able to gamble until you're an adult," right? And actually, it's the other way around. Being a kid, when it's all disposable income and you don't have a job and you can't lose a house and you can't lose a car, that's the time to gamble.
Right.
Because you can't bet the fucking farm on black, you know what I mean? You can't do it, right? But when you're an adult and you've got kids and you've got a mortgage, and that's when gambling, they should make gambling outlawed for everyone over 18. That would just make more sense, right? Like, if you want to be that protective, insular, big brother state. But the point is, unfortunately, that when it comes to losing, kids don't take that too well. Kids don't like losing, especially this mollycoddle generation of middle-class, white teenagers that predominantly make up esports. They're used to winning. And indeed, they're told they'll be winners at everything, by parents, by teachers, by social media, by TV. Everyone's going to win. You're all winners. You're all incredible. And losing's wrong, and let's put some social justice in there. Everyone wins, right? So you've got basically a generation of babies that lack any skills and any sort of coping strategies for when things go wrong. So what do? They stamp their feet. They pummel their fists. I've lost my skins, the skins that I didn't even pay for. Mummy bought me those skins, but I want those skins.
They create the thread on HLTV.org.
Well, no, again, far be it from me to again make any sort of cultural stereotypes. But a lot of the people that get the most upset do seem to come from countries that don't have what I would call a very high economic threshold anyway. So I kind of understand it. I'm more sympathetic towards somebody that's impoverished and betting a luxury item in the hope of turning it into more money and maybe even selling it, than somebody that's got money to burn, lives in a very privileged environment, and they're just upset because they've lost a fucking Karambit Fade or whatever. It's like it's very hard for me to sympathize with those people, and I would say they make up the bulk of these kids that cry about gambling. So yeah, for me, it should just be this simple. I think the lesson that you need to learn is that if a team loses and it isn't a throw, as in a fixed game, and you bet on them, welcome to the world of sports betting. Adults have been doing it for years and years and years. Go to the dog track, go to the horse track, bet on your favourite football team. Try betting on Premier League football, which is just random. And the sure thing, you're like, okay, right, I'll put I'll put £1,000 on that. Chelsea are definitely going to beat West Bromwich Albion when they've gone the entire season undefeated and they've already got the title in the bag or some shit. Yeah. Then they lose 3-0, 4-0, whatever it was. Welcome to sports betting. This is what happens. If you could win every week, everyone would do it. We'd all be millionaires, and gambling wouldn't exist. You know, there's a phrase: the house always wins. Like, gambling is not. It's just not designed for you to win. It should never be. If you're doing very well at it, brilliant for you. You're one of the lucky few. But the vast majority of people who gamble have to be losers for the economic model to function.
I think we have your next editorial, Richard, explaining gambling to the next generation.
Well, the thing is, though, like, actually, in a way, I do feel like there's some brutal lessons been handed out. You know, people who have bet on sure things in the past and have just had their inventory absolutely rinsed. I hope those people, after they've had their tantrum, take stock of it and like, oh yeah, right, I get it now, man. Yeah, gambling. There's a chance you can lose. Okay, cool.
Yeah, there's no loser's trophy in gambling, unfortunately.
But yeah, I totally support everything Freakazoid said. Because at the end of the day, if you can't handle losing, gambling isn't for you. It's that simple. So stop fucking it up for everybody by crying about it every time a team loses a game. Stop hating on teams that are. Do you think Cloud9 wanted to lose the final, guys? Do you think like, oh no? Well, what are people gonna say about us because their skins have got like, dude? Like, they didn't want to win, like, an extra $100,000 or whatever it was.
Yeah,
like,
the disappointment was definitely because of the skins, I think, when the game was over.
These people are unreal.
Well,
yeah, anyway.
One more quick hit in CSGO before we move on to League.
Yeah.
Devilwalk has made an interesting move to Luminosity.
Yes.
Going to join a North American team. Now, I'm of two minds on this. One, I'm pleased because I know it's inevitable. We're going to see the regions kind of combined. And just as we've seen European nations combine to make teams, we're going to see the regions combine to make new teams. Just as we have in League. So I'm ready to see it happen. I'm excited to see it happen. I want to see more of it. At the same time, I don't really see the payoff here. I don't see Devilwalk as an impact player you're bringing in to help a team, and I don't see Luminosity as a team that just really needed a good tactician to cross the threshold. You know, I think they have Peter, someone who does spot coaching for Keyed Stars because he's a good tactician. I don't really see Luminosity as a team that just needs that tactical edge that Devilwalk brings, where you sacrifice some player skill, which you might have to bring a player like him in to get that balance. So I don't know. My thoughts on Devilwalk to Luminosity, I'm happy to see it in theory. I'm not sure it's going to actually turn into much for the team. How about you?
It's very interesting, actually. So I think, first of all, I'm not too sure I agree with your assessment that what they lacked was some sort of tactical insight. Actually, when I watched all the other NA teams during the ESL, ESEA Pro League, the one thing that really stood out for me was tactically they'd all done their homework. The one team that looked like they were really sort of out of their depth tactically and were relying a bit too much on individual play were Luminosity. I caught the Luminosity games. I was thinking they were going to be the ones that had the upset potential, and they really just didn't seem to have that.
It was actually the opposite of that, as it turned out.
Yeah,
everyone else had the upset potential, and they didn't.
Yeah, exactly. They got wrecked. Now, the issue here is, of course, you're absolutely right. I don't think Devilwalk's going to come in and be a top fragger. I don't necessarily think they need that. I think they've got fraggers in the team. But what's interesting is that he replaces, Nafly, and he was their top fragger pretty much. I mean, statistically, he was like hands down the guy that was just dropping 30s,
the best player on the team. Pretty clearly.
Now, I don't think Devilwalk's replaced Naf. I think Naf's going to end up at a bigger team very soon, in fact. I think that announcement's going to come rolling out. We all can feel it in our water, can't we, that the next NA shuffle's happening. It's, ooh, the streamers are saying, 50 subs and I'll leak the lineups, guys. It's happening already. So I definitely think he'll end up on a bigger and better team. He's too good a talent not to. And the idea of him just sitting on a shelf, rotting away somewhere, is pretty frightening. I mean, where it would be, I don't know. Nihilum, maybe? Who knows? I know they just brought in Desi, but Hiko's clearly wanting to build his master race team.
Yes.
So
the new Flipside Tactics member, Hiko.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Best mates were simple. So yeah, that's going to be interesting. But I think Devil Walk will absolutely bring something to this team. He's a very smart guy. He spent all that time coaching. I think his analysis is on point. He didn't look bad when he came back and played very briefly in that league team. And he is a good player. People forget this is a guy who has won a major. Not many players get to say that. So I'm interested to see what he's going to bring. I definitely think he'll be a caller. I definitely think he'll be a strategist within the team. And yeah, I absolutely think he will bring something to them. I think Luminosity will improve.
We'll see. Given the fallout from the NAFLI situation, I do wonder if their performance at the ESA Pro League final was in part due to some chemistry issues, perhaps, because it seems to be an acrimonious departure between the two parties. And when your best player, when your best fragger is the least involved in terms of chemistry, that can be a bad thing.
And sorry, apparently, someone's just informed me, Richard, you're a little bit behind. Obviously, I've been writing all day. So apparently, it's Elevate that NAF is going to be on. So
okay.
There you go.
Well, good luck to him there. Elevate's been kind of the perennial good luck to you team. We'll see how that works out.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's he's a hugely talented individual. He'll have an impact wherever he goes.
Yeah, it was apparently like an hour ago that happened.
Yeah.
By the way, Rip Storm, one of the old veterans, long time player.
Yes, very
seems to have quietly rode off into the sunset. No big announcement, no big retirement thing, just kind of making his way. So,
well, I like it like that,
salute.
I like it when players do that and don't make a big kerfuffle about it because it always leaves the door open.
Yeah,
I think players that retire and then come back, and then retire again and then come back, I don't really have any time for those guys.
I can't imagine anyone doing that in esports, Richard. That's absurd, absolutely absurd.
That's never happened.
Let's move on to a pretty big story here, and
yes.
We don't recap the whole thing because it's very lengthy, and really you should go to dailydot.com and read the story for yourself. Richard wrote quite the expansive piece on the Meet Your Makers esports organization. Again, daily.com/topic/esports, or just Google daily.mym. I'm sure it'll come up there as well. A comprehensive look at the organization and their flaws and pitfalls and various warts and not good things about them. Very briefly, Richard, let's talk about how this organization turned sour, how things went south for them, and I think more specifically, what lessons we can take from the MYM story that will better inform future organizations and current ones and how to run a competent organization that isn't full of these sorts of, that doesn't end up being a story like this one, basically.
Well, first of all, for me, actually, the collection of vagabonds, thieves, and incompetents that made up MYM, they're not even the most grotesque part of this story. They are just the standard esports chances that come into the business. They talk a good game. They talk about how they're going to change the industry. They talk about how they're going to do things right. They talk about how they're going to build empires. They sit in an echo chamber of bullshit where they just talk back and forward about all these wonderful things they're going to achieve. And they spill those lies out to the players, and the players lap it up wholesale because they're young and they're naive and they think, well, how many more times can people come into the scene and scam players? And of course, that just happens all the time. So they are just par for the course, unfortunately, in esports. I mean, if anyone wants a real good laugh, I recommend going to Khalid Naeem's LinkedIn page. And on his LinkedIn page, you will see that he says he is passionate about protecting children, which I do find hilarious, given the fact that he's effectively defrauded and lied to young adults. But anyway, that being said, for me, the biggest takeaway from all of this isn't that there's dirty organizations in esports, because let's just be real. I'm inundated. I'm overwhelmed with the number of organizations I could expose if I had the time. It just happens every day, frankly. And it's never going to change because no one's interested in fixing it. There's too much money being made in preserving the lie, and there's no money being made in telling the truth. And that's why the people who report this are very few and far between, And the websites that publish it, even less so. Indeed, we saw immediately at the time how the Score was very reluctant to touch anything about this story. And you may say, I met a executive from the Score at, I think it was the DreamHack party, DreamHack Summer. He came up to me and he said, "Hi, Richard Lewis, big fan. Just want to say I admire your journalism." I turned to him and I said, "Well, why don't you fucking emulate it then?" And I was very rude to him. And I don't make any bones about it, because this is an individual who stopped them publishing that Corey recording before it fell into my hands. They said it was some legal mumbo-jumbo, almost as if the Daily Dot doesn't have a law team, which of course we do. We do have a legal team, and it passed with flying colours. But then they stopped the same reporter writing a follow-up piece about the money being owed and how it had been owed for months. And they gave me that report as well. So I wouldn't have even been able to write this article without the due diligence of a reporter at the Score. And yet the Score is so disinterested in rocking the boat and actually doing good journalism that they are stopping their own reporters breaking stories, which I think is, again, it's frankly appalling. But that isn't even the biggest take home. That there's a confederacy of people that want to protect organizations that actively steal from people and actively lie to people. Once again, it's our old friends Riot, who they came out and they said during the time of the Corey ruling, what did they say? They said our number one, it's even in the email Nick Allen sent to Corey. They said our number one priority is player welfare, right? Now, what could be more linked to welfare than money, right? Now, Riot have already proven that this isn't true with the Copenhagen Wolves fiasco. You've got 5 players sleeping on pallet beds, no curtains on the windows, barely any furniture in the house. Riot Games know this, and they haven't intervened. They haven't done anything. They haven't said that isn't acceptable, but they care about player welfare, apparently. When Alltech, I believe it was, Evil Geniuses, was sleeping in the fucking porch like a pet dog because the manager hadn't made enough beds available for him, did Riot intervene? This was public knowledge. Crepo talked about this on Facebook. Did Riot intervene? Did Riot sanction anybody? No, but they care about player welfare. Okay, how much more lip service are you going to pay? Well, the emails that I was sent when I was looking at this months ago showed that the organization were actively saying, we haven't paid the players. We haven't even paid them the Riot salary because tax problems or something, right? And then that changes to we haven't paid the players for approximately 3 to 4 months, depending on who you talk to, because they left a bit of rubbish in the house. And it cost us 6,900 euros to do a basic cleanup job. Keep in mind that Riot must have also known that this organization was being controlled by people that were not supposed to have any direct influence over an organization at all in their league. And yet they just let it slide because of a loophole, because of paperwork, because of a technicality. Now, those Super Hot Crew MYM players have probably been treated as bad as anybody in LCS. And apparently Riot care about player welfare. And yet all they said was, yep, thanks for keeping us informed. Thanks for letting us know you're not paying the players for 4 months. That's great. Oh, you still haven't paid them? Yeah, no problem. Thanks. People should be outraged about that. I'm outraged about it because Riot are enabling the organizations to fuck over the players, and they're doing it because they just want to maintain the status quo for their league. As long as it looks okay to the outside world, fine. Doesn't really matter what's happening. All the players are NDA'd up the ass anyway. It's absolutely shocking. And this comes off the back of the Copenhagen Wolves story. Again, don't even have a washing machine in the house. I mean, last time I checked, in Britain at least, that would now be the sort of mark where you would be considered, if you didn't have one of those, you're below the poverty line. But they care about player welfare. So what's the lesson we learn? Well, the lesson we learn once again is that Riot Games do not care about player welfare. They will not do anything They'd rather spend their time trying to stifle journalists that talk about it and trying to get organizations to not talk about it and trying to get players signed to egregious non-disclosure agreements so they can't talk about it than actually just say to the organizations, can you treat your players like humans and not commodities? That's the lesson.
A good lesson, I think, to take. But I guess the question that immediately follows that one is, what does it take for Riot Games to themselves take up that lesson and to improve the way they handle their own players, who are often, again, children, basically, teenagers? What does it take for Riot to change the way they go about this?
They're never going to. They're simply never going to. If public shaming from a journalist isn't going to work, what are we left with here? What are we left with here? Riot spend their time trying to think of ways to hide the truth from coming out rather than embrace the truth and use it for positive change. They never used to be like this. As the money has increased and their stature has increased, they've become more obsessed with making it look like they've created a utopia. There is no sporting league on the planet that is free from corruption, that is free from mistreatment, that is free from abuse of players. And you cannot build Rome overnight. I mean, look at FIFA. Look at everything that's gone on there. Look how dirty that is. Now, if we leave it to FIFA to fix the fundamental problems with FIFA, what do you think's going to happen? Riot need to admit either two things, right? It's just one. There's only two ways. You've got to say one or the other, right? And that is that they really don't care about any of these things. It's all a marketing exercise. And that's fine. If you admit that, it doesn't really matter, does it? Everyone can go in with their eyes open, right? And the people can then, outside of it, can make a decision. Do I want to support a company that thinks that way? Or you go down the other route and you say, look, like they say every time they can't implement something that the community wants, they go, oh, but we grew too fast. We never expected to be this big. And we don't have the infrastructure or the staff, even though they employ something like 2,000 people worldwide, which in games development terms is unprecedented. But anyway, so they say, oh, we've grown too fast. We can't do all of these things. All right, then. Get external arbitrary bodies that can help you do this. Let's get an appeals panel for your bullshit rulings that are so inconsistent, it blows my mind. Let's get a players' union in place. And I don't mean one run by the likes of Snoopy, who says he's going to make one, and then actively stops other people doing it before taking a highly paid, glamorous job with a gambling company. Let's actually do something about it, or admit you're never going to do something about it. Because Riot will not do something about it. They can't be trusted to do something about it. There's nobody at Riot that wants to do anything about it. And it's going to keep happening and happening and happening. We're selling this lie to League of Legends aspirational kids that it is the promised land, that you get a salary, that you get a team house, that you get an organization that looks after you, that you get status, presence. It's the dream. You are an athlete. You're like the LeBron James of League, baby. And then in reality, your salary's minimum wage. You have no bargaining power. You are completely controlled in what you can and can't say through contracts. You've signed away all your image rights in the standard LCS contract. And on top of that, you go back to a gaming house that made my first year halls as a student look like a fucking palace. Is that the dream? Is that the dream you want to sell to esports aspirational kids? It's not what I signed off on. It's not what I wanted the industry to be when I started doing this 10 years ago. And Riot should have higher fucking standards.
They should. They don't. Perhaps one day they will. We'll find out in due time, because I think Riot's not going anywhere anytime soon. So how this develops, we'll see. It's a sad situation that occurred with MIM, and it's equally sad that this thing goes on elsewhere in the world, and it's just kind of accepted as a standard. I think there's less shock and more, oh, right, this happens again.
Yeah,
honestly.
And that's the thing, man. The apathy, like, people don't even get angry about it anymore.
Right.
Like, people, there's so many stories about kids, and, like, they're kids to me, all right? I know they're young adults, right? But I'm an old man, right? I got gray hairs in my beard. I'm allowed to call these guys kids now,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
I've earned that, right? So, and these kids just get ripped off. ripped off time and time and time again. And do you know what's even worse? There's shit we don't even know about. I mean, there's people right now at the highest level of the game that still owe money, that have had terrible things happen to them, that they cannot talk about, will not talk about. Even the people who've retired, you think, oh, Richard, well, if all of this was so bad, wouldn't the people who've retired like be outing it and stuff? Well, first of all, half of these people want to come back and still work in the industry. Everyone's got their heads so twisted. The standard of the industry is so bad that even a company that does something that's like indefensible but pays money is better than 90% of the other opportunities out there. So people don't want to do it for that reason. And then the other thing is, like, people are still signed to NDAs and all sorts of shit. Just on the slide, just on the sneak. And keep in mind as well, when I say about the image rights thing, that's no small thing to be signing away. I've got an agent. Like, signing your image rights away, big deal. Massive deal. To do it just for the right to earn the basic salary equivalent to minimum wage in most countries, it's unreal. That is not an acceptable return for your image rights, especially when it explicitly says in an LCS contract, we can do with your image whatever we want for promotional purposes. We can distort your voice for promotional purposes. You quit our game, you go play a rival game, we can still use your face to promote our game forever, for life. And you've signed it away for nothing. It's appalling. Somebody has got to really start looking at this. I mean, seriously, it's got to be challenged, because it's not going to be me that fixes this problem. Like, I'm not going to be here. Like, seriously, it's just, there's no way that it's going to be me. But people need to get angry and pick up the torch and do something about it. Otherwise, it's going to be like this forever. This is how it's going to be. This is going to be the peak of esports. And if we accept this as the peak of esports, we all ought to be ashamed.
I think one of the main issues is that people who are most in position to do something about it and to have impactful change often stand to benefit from the status quo. That they make money playing League, so if they were to take a hardline stance and try to really affect change, they would potentially lose their source of income and lose their position in esports as it currently stands. They have to make a sacrifice, basically. And we've seen in the past in sports, when players who make big changes, who institute players' unions and make big differences, they often have to sacrifice their own playing careers and become pariahs, really, for decades in order to have that happen. And it's who is going to take that baton? It's a hard thing for someone to take on. It is. It's a big ask.
Yeah, it's exactly. And that, people need to, everyone's scared. I mean, everyone's scared. The reason we don't have a player union, Riot have made it abundantly clear privately behind closed doors. They'd much rather that this wasn't happening. That people have tried to do it. People have tried to mobilize. They do not want it to happen. They make it abundantly clear they are not keen on it whatsoever. And why would they be? They've got a monopoly. They have got a stranglehold on the industry. So who's going to step up and do it? And who can truly be independent anyway? I mean, I see people talking about, oh, well, we'll do it. And it's like, hang on a minute, look at the company you work for. You definitely can't do it. And then you hear player owners, oh, we're mobilizing into a union. Yeah, but hang on, right? You're a team owner. You're part of the problem. You fuck over the players just as much as anyone else. So you can't represent player rights. But like, something has got to change, because the system right now is absolutely broken, and it's broken in favor of the people that take the biggest share. The people that get away with the biggest abuses make the most money. And it's almost as if the abuse that you can exert, the abuse of power you can exert, is directly proportional to the amount of money you have in the bank. And you go right down the food chain, you get to the players, who ultimately, if you think about how it works in any other sports, the players down here, like, look at the lockout in NBA. Players are millionaires, right? Well, that ain't happening in esports. It's happening in some very rare examples. But for the most part in League, it's minimum wage, and shut up, and here's your streaming money, and we're making you superstars, and yeah, go back, sleep in your shitty house, have a good night. It's just, it's not acceptable. This is a company that's owned by the biggest company in China. The money they must have is unbelievable. It's just, it's not good enough. It simply isn't good enough. And like I say, for me, the biggest take home is that Riot pretty much let MYM get away with all of this. They even said they conducted their own investigation, and then they deliberately worded it in a way to say, MYM are a separate organization and there's no money outstanding. I mean, sure, if they dug a little bit deeper, they would have found out that MYM didn't pay their coach for 4 months either. But that's fine, that's fine. And they said it was all related to the Super Hot Crew thing, which was completely separate. But at no point in the report did they acknowledge that it was all the same people involved. How does that work? How is that fair? How can you say you care about player rights? It's just, honestly, it just blows my mind. I was still having this conversation. They've been around how long now? It's just, it's honestly, it's awful. Awful.
All fair questions, and unfortunately, we'll probably see the same thing happen again before we see any kind of meaningful change. And in fact, it's likely that we'll see something even worse than this happen before we see meaningful change. Maybe that's the catalyst. You see there's the absolute bottoming out of the possibilities of what could happen to players involved in the industry before we see them benefit in some way, in some meaningful way. So we'll find out. The road to being a millionaire right now is just win the International, be one of the 5 players who does that. Other than that, there's not really a good path to that. We see the industry now projected to get to 1 billion revenues by 2017. You'd think that salaries would come up a little bit beyond minimum wage in the biggest game in the world. I
think it tells you everything that you need to know is that, you know, the owners in, the very successful owners in League of Legends are millionaires, not the players, nowhere near for the players. But as you rightly say, in Dota, there's multiple players that have cleared over a million in career earnings. I think that's happened in StarCraft as well. It's in CS:GO. We're starting to get there now.
And yes, we look at League as the model of the professional esports league. It kind of tells you what's going on and how that's built. What's
wrong with this picture?
Right. Something's wrong with it. A few things actually. Be sure to check out Richard's article at the Daily Dot to see for yourself a few things that are wrong with the picture.